with kids that I see a lot is it's not it's these questions that come up for them and the ways in which they feel disabled is because of these systems that we've set up that only allow for a very limited expression of being a human being. And so when kids are very young and they don't fit into that, they do have questions of who am I? Because it's like, well, if I don't fit into the school system, which is where all kids are supposed to fit, then there must be something wrong with me.
Exactly.
And that's one of the reasons why in my work, because generally speaking, people who are in my profession, they sort of see their job as helping the child, right? So, like remediating, for example, if it's dyslexia or whatever the learning disabilities, or supporting with ways to sort of help kids, organize and plan and attention. But I really think that we have to be pushing the school systems.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people, they say, okay, yeah, we know where Canada is, yeah. And then British Columbia is on the west coast, right? Right, that's where we are. And we have this big city called Vancouver, British Columbia. We are 500 miles north, or 800 kilometers for our friends in Europe, north of Vancouver, which puts us physically in the center of British Columbia, north-south, east to west. And with all the things going on around the world right now, is that we believe in making Canada great again. I heard a rumor the other day is that we are officially talking to Washington State, Oregon, and California to become part of Canada. Now,
Oh, really?
yeah, and I say, okay, well, look at that, because DJ has other ideas, obviously, and so we'll give him the rest of the UNI. So anyway, tongue in cheek a little bit. So, Dr. Bibi Pirayesh, can I call
Yes.
you Bibi?
Yes, BB's fine.
So, you have a very interesting background. Educational therapist, is learning rights advocate based in Los Angeles, California. She has spent at least 15 years working with hundreds of children, parents, teachers, in school enhanced, and lives with children with learning disability, and loves dogs.
Yes, can you hear my dog in the
Yeah, I
background? I
hear
just muted
it.
up.
I love dogs too. So, Bibi, so first question, are you the dog doesn't bother us, just let it be. So
Oh, just so you know, because of the LA fires,
yeah,
I am actually not in my usual spot right now. I'm in a hotel room and there's people coming and going, and that's why he's kind of
and
losing it.
that would have been my question that I wanted to ask you. Are you affected by the fires, and if
Well,
so, how?
yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky because I was not directly affected. I don't live in I live south of where we've had the fires, but so many of my clients, friends, people I know have been affected, and in a way, the whole city is just kind of traumatized, I think.
Unbelievable.
So, yeah, yeah, and it's still going on. I mean,
I
we just
know.
had new fires break out in Brentwood and Bel Air, and
Right.
it's really, yeah, it's really been a
But
difficult
also in the
time.
southern part, right? So obviously, Bel Air and Hollywood and all those places are being affected by it. And the key is that storms, and I'm watching it very closely.
Mm.
Because Canada and the United States are very, very close. We watch each other's television, and so I'm watching CNN and seeing all of this going on, and it breaks my heart, the devastation to so many people losing
Yeah,
everything, and not only that part, but then their jobs and all those things around it.
Yeah, and I mean, I have students that I work with whose schools burned down. So it's just been a really, really difficult time. Obviously, the people who live in Altadena, their fire was horrible as well. And we've just never had, in all of the years that I've lived in LA, we've never had the Santa Ana winds be this late in the year or be this
Exactly.
strong.
Or this early
So
in the
the
year.
reason
Yeah.
that I can't, I'm sort of not in my usual space right now is because we're
Right.
also getting regular power outages
Right.
because they're trying to be like, I don't know, preventatively turning the power
Exactly.
out. So
Yeah.
it's been a really chaotic time in LA. Yeah, but I think as the city will come through this, and I think we have to learn from it because if this keeps happening, you know,
And the question is obviously that the reality of global warming. We look at all the extremes that are happening around the world, not
yeah,
limited to North America, but that we see in the rest of the world, but in particular the east coast of the United States, and then
mhm,
that the storms or the in California normally that is more around September each that
mhm,
that area, but not in January, February
yeah,
potentially. And
yeah,
but the extent of it, and how quickly I'm in British Columbia and have been here for 60 years, and I've seen
well,
several forest fires. Fires are dangerous, and the power of fires, they can spread in seconds very, very
right,
quickly. And as they did in California, add to that the winds, and
yeah,
so. But it makes me wonder about two things. Global warming obviously is real, is the one
hmm
thing that we should keep working towards. But the other one is that what do they do in California? Because what's going to happen next in rebuilding, and how do you prevent it, and what can you do to be more proactive in trying to avoid these particular kind of disasters?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people are very upset about that. They feel that the city planning and maintenance wasn't really being done in the way that it was supposed to be. I think just as a country, we spent so much of our money and our time and our energy not on the things that we should be focusing on, like
Right,
our infrastructure
right.
and these types of services. And yeah, I mean, on the East Coast, I just heard of a family in the Appalachian Mountains who were also hit by that hurricane, which never happens. They froze to death. Three people froze to death because
Unbelievable.
the response has been so horrible. I have a friend, a very dear friend of mine, who lost her house in Helene in Florida, and now there's snow in Florida, like a few months after that insane hurricane.
Can you believe that, Bibi? I'm sitting in central British Columbia. I'm looking outside here, and I don't know, you can see it. It's a beautiful sunny day. We had a little bit of
Mm,
snow, about 2 inches maybe. This is normally, when I first came here in 1965, to have 30, 40 below at least 3 times a winter was not uncommon.
mm,
Winter would start,
mm,
say, about October and then last till about March, April. And so
mhm.
here, the climate has, we have had very few cold days. Like today, probably it's going to be above zero, which is amazing here, really. It should be
Yeah.
20 below. And then, as you already indicated, and then watching on television, they got snow in Florida. Really? you know?
In Florida and in New Orleans, like the entire southern coast is covered in snow. People who've never seen snow in their lives
No.
are making snow angels. It's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah. And then trying to drive their cars, they have no snow tires. They have, oh my God, it's difficult, difficult.
It's been, yeah, I mean, I think that we all knew. It's funny you mentioned Canada. I used to live in Toronto. I went to high school there, and I have still friends and family there, and I talk to them, and they're like, it's not, the winters are not like they used to be at
No,
all.
they're not.
So yeah, I mean, I think that we all knew this was coming, but it came much sooner, and it's been much more extreme than I thought it wouldn't be in my lifetime, but here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah.
And so this is just the warning, hopefully, that what we see on the East Coast between the tornadoes, the storms, the snow, the ice, the changing of the climate, and then looking obviously on the West Side, California in particular, that we are familiar with this may happen, every so often, but not to this extent.
Right.
and
Right.
and and so then it really becomes a question of what do we do now, because at this point something has to be done more proactive, and especially and I don't want to be critical about it, but obviously a lot of people are now about what was done, what could have been done better, being preemptive, and all of those
Mm-hmm.
things. But
Mm-hmm.
but in the
Yeah,
meantime,
I
to
mean,
see, yeah,
I don't want to be pessimistic, but I do wonder, and this is actually, I talk to kids about this a lot because they are so hyper aware of the climates, catastrophes and the climate situation that we're in. And I think it's a fair question to ask if anything can still be done at this point, or if we've just sort of passed the point of no return. I mean, I don't want to be that pessimistic, but I don't know. I don't know. We certainly have been ignoring it for a very long time and continue to.
yeah, it makes me wonder, because I'm 84 years old. I was born in 84 years young, I call it. I was born
Yes.
in northeastern Holland in 1940, and as a kid growing up, my birthday is November the 1st, and in the city that I
Mm,
grew up on, we used to skate on the canals, and uh,
mm,
and so that's what we did. Now the canal never freezes anymore.
mm,
It already then, and obviously now being in northern British Columbia, we had we have lots of forest here, but we have
mhm,
had a lot of beetle kill in the pine forest in particular, that devastated a lot of our pine, lodgepole pine
wow.
trees, all direct, indirect relating to global warming, at least in my opinion, and
Mm,
expert opinions, and all the things happening in the United States in particular. Here, then obviously looking outside and seeing we have very little snow. Where is the snow? It's in Florida. You really?
yeah,
you know. So yeah, it's
yeah.
we can only do so many things about it, other than gradually, hopefully, becoming more proactive in global warming, and do things that will hopefully slow that down. And the other part is accept the things that we cannot change, but try to be preemptive in some form or fashion.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We'll see. It's sort of, I feel like it's our governments that need to do more, but we'll
Yeah.
see.
Well, we oh, so now we can blame Donald. It's his fault. He did it.
I mean, maybe he didn't do it, but I don't think he's helping. So,
Yeah, well, you buy the horse, you ride it, right? So and that's the way I look at it. So, so we blame
yes,
Donald. He
yep.
won't like me either. Then no, I can't. I have to be careful. Anyway, so so let's educational therapist and learning advocate. So all the stuff that you're doing, I'm familiar with neurodiversity, and as I already said to you earlier, is that I I'm blessed to have ADHD and I have dyslexia, but it took me a long time to know that. I was born, as I
Mm.
said, in northeastern Holland in November the 1st, 1940. The war years, it was tough go, and we can do a whole program about that part alone. But anyway, when I came from there, was affected by PTSD and then child. I was not
Mm.
successful academically. I failed grade 3. I failed grade 7 3 times. And then they said,
Oh, wow.
what we gonna do with this guy? Well, some people said to my parents, send him to the mentally challenged school. They said, no, we're not gonna do that. So
Wow.
at 12 and a half years old, they said, okay, well, let's teach him a trade where he can use his hands, because obviously he's not smart
Mhm.
enough. They didn't say that, but other people did. And I became a laborer at 12 and a half years old and went to a furniture factory and worked there. And then I loved it. But kids, as they grow up, they can be very hard on each other. The friends that I had in grade 7 went on to college, then the university, and I was a laborer. And
Oh my
I was
gosh.
always a happy guy and always positive, and I knew I was just as smart as the other guys, girls, whatever, but
Mhm.
inside of me. And then the other part that's changed my life is, in a way, we were liberated April the 12th, 1945, by the Canadian Army, and things were pretty rough. When that happened, we
Mm.
saw far too much, as I said, that we should not have seen. It made such an impression on me that I always knew from that point forward that when I grew up, I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And
Oh,
so
wow.
I wanted to go when I was 17. They wouldn't let me. Then I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force, in my case, for 2 years, the draft. And then I left for Canada when I was 23 with a dream to go to Canada, but also had a dream to build a lumber mill to prove to me that I could do it. And I was just as smart as all the other ones. I had this dream and I could do that. So I left Amsterdam, flew into Montreal, took the train across Canada. Oh my God, 4 days, 5 nights. Can you believe it? It's a long, long way to go. And
Wow.
then arrived in Vancouver, went to the immigration office there, couldn't speak English, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. Fortunately, it was a German fella there, and I could speak some German. And I told him I want to build a lumber mill. So he said, Prince George, go to Prince George.
Oh,
So
wow.
I did. I got on the bus, 12 hours Greyhound bus. That is 60 years ago. I'm still in Prince George. If I look outside the window there, I can still see where the Greyhound station used to be. And I came off the bus, and I wanted to start with nothing because to prove to me, not to anybody else, that I was just
Mm.
as good as anybody else. So I had my suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least 3 times. I had $25.47. Attitude. I've
Wow.
always been positive and still am today. Passion, whatever I do, I give it 125%. Work ethic, I work harder than anybody. I still do that today at 84. I usually get up at 5:30 in the morning, and then I always make my bed, and I always think I'm late. And so, and yes, I did build my mill and 10 other companies, but it's not about that. And then did all kinds of other things. And then the other thing that changed my life is that I went to a bookstore here when I was already here for 32 years,
Mhm.
1997. I was already successful. Everybody said, oh, you're so successful and blah, blah, blah. I didn't feel that way. I still felt I had failed. And so, and I went to the bookstore and I picked up a book. And I have the actual book in my hand that changed my life. And so, Driven to Distraction is the book
Oh,
by
yes.
Dr. Hollywell, medical
Yes.
doctor. He is ADHD and has dyslexia. And I wrote in the book, when I saw the book, I nearly wore it out. This is the actual book. I wrote in
Wow.
it in Dutch, now I finally know who I am. And I wrote underneath it January 1997. Dr. Helwell wrote these books and 15 other ones, actually. In
Mm-hmm.
1993, I bought it in January 1997. It changed my life. So, but the more I found out about it in going to Google and all the other things about ADHD, it took me 5 years before I would go to my doc that was a personal friend, delivered our
Mm-hmm.
two daughters, and I went into his office and he said, "Hey, John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." And so we checked it out, and yes, I do. And so now the other part about it that you may find interesting is that Dr. Helliwell, very well known globally, has written 18 books, 5 on distraction. You are my podcast number 368, and I had Dr. Helliwell on my podcast number
Oh,
203, On the Brink. It was John A. Brink for our guests that are interested. And so we had a discussion. Can you believe it? How the world
that's
turns around?
amazing. Wow.
So as I had the discussion with Dr. Halliwell, and he's the expert, but I lived it, is saying that I thought initially 8% of the population probably ADHD, male, female, although females present it differently than males do. And so then, but then I found I thought it was much higher than that. So when with Dr. Halliwell, I suggested in my mind for his views that it was probably 20%, maybe even more. He said, "No, John, it's more than 25%. I
Oh,
agree with him.
wow.
And then the other part about it that I found interesting is that over all those years, and the podcast was done about 6 months, 8 months ago, probably. The other thing that I found interesting about it is that with all the people that I've met, successful entrepreneurs, business people, and other successful people, I believe, and I suggested to Dr. Hollywell, that probably 50% of them, the successful ones, are ADHD. He said,
Mm.
no, he said, no, John, 75%. I agree with him. So that's kind of, and then since that time, so then by then, I was 62 when I went to my doc, and we decide, and he did the diagnosis. I'm ADHD. So for 50 years, from the time that I was 12 and a half, failed grade 3, failed grade 7 3 times, went through all of that for 50 years, wondering, who am I? Until I was
Mm.
62, that then changed everything. Since that time, my companies became even more successful than they were already, but they were already were in spite of that. And then
Mm-hmm.
I started becoming an author. I'm working on my 6th book, including the one on ADHD. The first one that I did is Against All Odds,
Mm-hmm.
and a number of other ones. And so it then unlocked me in terms of who am I. And so it became a very much part of me that I like to share with others. I do a
Mm-hmm.
lot of public speaking. I'm very active on podcasting, writing books about it. Is that I believe potentially it's a superpower, and that the frequency of occurrence. I'm not an expert, but from my perspective, probably 30% of the population globally ADHD, and
Mm-hmm.
and so that's where I am. But that I had took me
That's
50 years before I knew.
that is an incredible story. I mean, we do hear a lot stories of people who get diagnosed as adults and how life-changing it is for them, but I don't think I've ever heard of someone being diagnosed at 60, that's incredible. Um, I have so many questions for you now. Now I feel like I'm going to interview you because I have so many questions.
I had to kind
Um,
of give you the background, right? So,
yes, no, that's an
yeah.
incredible story. I'm curious as to what all of this felt like for you, like what this feels like for you in your body, and how you manage that as a child versus when you got older and started working. I'm curious what the impact of being in the Navy was.
Air
And
Force,
then
yeah.
I'm Air Force, sorry.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
fine. Yeah.
and then you said that the second that your doctor kind of acknowledged that, you did in fact that it was life changing. Why was that like so life changing? What changed for you
Right.
exactly?
So the interesting part about that, Bibi, is that I was born November the 1st, 1940. The war just started. Hitler invaded Western Europe. My
Mm-hmm.
mom and dad were married when they were in 1938. They were in love. My dad had a job in a lumber factory, and then they had a beautiful house. Very quickly had a boy and a girl, and then obviously my mom was pregnant with me, and then everything changed. My dad was there was a fear of the Germans invading Holland or Western Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and he was called into the Dutch army. And then the last, in April of 1940, and the last they heard from him was under the bombing of Rotterdam that killed thousands of people. So for 5 years, they would not know if he was dead or alive. And so she was pretty much on her own in
Mm.
a war setting. And so there's a number of things that I remember. Hundreds of planes overhead, a sound that I will never forget when the Allied forces were bombing the German war infrastructure. And then the other one, 2044, was they had cut off all the food. We as little kids would go every morning with gunny sacks into the railroad yards, pick up anything edible and burnable. And the reason that we did as kids, because they wouldn't shoot us, they boot us one and we'd be back the following day. And then the next thing that I remember is that to see far too much when the Allied forces landed in Normandy in the summer of 1944, they pushed the Canadian Army pushed through France, Belgium, western part of Holland, and then pushed them through the top of Holland back to Germany. So we were living 10 minutes from the German border in northeastern Holland, saw far too many things that we should not have seen. And so
Yeah.
that affected me, still have that today, PTSD, and a child, all but part of me. In terms of failing grade 3 and grade 7. I don't know, I lived in a different world mentally. And so I never thought about anything like ADHD. There was just not something I
Right.
even understood until 1997 when I picked up this book. But I was different. And so for me, it was a lot of times the question, who am I? And
Hmm.
it made me kind of in a way punish myself to a certain extent. I wanted to go to
Oh.
Canada. I felt I had to go start anew because obviously I failed. The traditional thing in Holland was that the first thing that they ask you is saying, okay, you like to get a job or you want to buy a house or whatever it is, then what is your background? What's your education? And where are your diplomas? I have no diplomas. So
Mhm.
and so I felt I had to start new, and my dream was to go to Canada, and then I I wanted to prove to me that I could do what other people did, build a mill, lumber mill, but start with nothing. And not, I
Mm.
didn't want to know anybody. I didn't want anybody to help me. A little bit on the radical side. So I either would come back successful or in the box. And so that's
Mm.
when I arrived here in my one suitcase. 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and $25.47. Couldn't speak the language, didn't have a job, and then started as a cleanup man, blah, 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 all the other kind of things. But always was wondering, who am I? Why am
Hmm.
I different?
Why am I different?
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, I mean, it sounds almost like the move to Canada, maybe there was also a hope of being in a different place that would understand you
exactly.
differently.
Yeah,
I think, one of the things with kids that I see a lot is it's not, it's these questions that come up for them and the ways in which they feel disabled is because of these systems that we've set up that only allow for a very limited expression of being a human being. And so when kids are very young and they don't fit into that, they do have questions of who am I? Because it's like, well, if I don't fit into the school system, which is where all kids are supposed to fit, then there must be something wrong with me.
exactly.
And that's one of the reasons why in my work, because generally speaking, people who are in my profession, they sort of see their job as helping the child, right? So, like remediating, for example, if it's dyslexia or whatever the learning disabilities, or supporting with ways to sort of help kids, organize and plan and attention. But I really think that we have to be pushing the school systems and the medical system and the systems that are supposed to be kind of reflective of the diversity that we have in terms of expressions of being a human being. And I mean, the numbers that you're quoting with 30%, so those are the highest that I have heard. But I do know that it's something that continues to grow in terms of, more and more diagnosis. So yeah, if 30%, for example, of the population, or even if it's 10%, whatever it is having an experience like this, how can we be so blind to it, um, and let kids feel like, there's something wrong with me, and what is wrong with me, and who am I? I mean, that's a really deep existential question for a child that young to have to carry on their own. And I really do see that as I mean, you were in a different time. I recognize that. But even now, we don't seem to really put our focus in the right place.
The interesting part about it, BB, is that I do a lot of podcasting, right? So I've done probably around 500, I think. You're number 368, and I love it. It's the new media, and it's just on its infancy. Because while you and me are having a dialogue, you from Southern California, me from Central British Columbia, Canada, we already know that hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people are watching us in this dialogue. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
And the other
Mm-hmm.
part about it, what makes it interesting, is that it is uncanny, unbelievable how many podcasts I do with people that are very successful that
Mm-hmm.
indicate to me I'm ADHD, but I really have not said anything about it over and
Mm-hmm.
over and over and over and over and over again. That happens simply
Yeah.
because the stigma still is not quite reconciled, that it is not a deficiency, it is not a liability. In fact, it can be the opposite. It can be, like, for me, I was always good with numbers. I have an
Mm-hmm.
amazing memory. I have dyslexia, but I'm a good writer, not a good reader, obviously. And so, but the advantages to me, and I have energy and I passion and all those other kind of things. And so, the most important part for that I try to do in my own way, and I'm not medically certified to do anything other than to share my experience, is that first and foremost, if a young person is diagnosed, or if there is thoughts about maybe having ADHD, and then encourage them that that's not a deficiency, it's not a stigma in some form, it's not something that should be looked at as a liability. In fact, look at it from the opposite and accept that a large number of the population, my mind, ladder higher than lower, is ADHD. And for a lot of people, even now, I did a presentation about 6, 8 months ago. I forget now when it was, but and usually on entrepreneurship or those kind of things. But I always include a bit of ADHD and talk about my history, and then usually say, anybody in the room here ADHD, and several of the hands go up, and others go up and saying, I've never told anybody, but at least 2 or 3 of them never told anybody, and then by the time I am done with my presentation, a lot of people say, damn, I wish I had it too.
Well, I mean, I do think, and I have had many encounters with people who have been able to use their, because usually when we describe ADHD, we talk about it in a very deficit kind of pathologizing context. But we also know at the same time that people that we identify in this way usually have these other incredible strengths, like they can, function differently in time and space. And if you're not in this linear way of thinking, that can be an asset. But I do want to emphasize that there are also people who do become completely debilitated by their ADHD. So people experience it differently. People have different other strengths that like help them, or but I one point that I do absolutely agree with is the question of the stigma, and the shame that people feel they sometimes have to carry. And that does again come back to our culture of schooling, because in our schools we don't set things up in a way that's like, okay, well, everyone's going to do this differently. Let me teach you the way that you learn. Let me teach you the way that you learn. Instead, we're like, no, this is the way. And if you don't fit it, we're going to give you a label. So, yeah.
The question is this one, Bibi, is that, I have an example of that, and you're familiar with Canada, so I live in northern British Columbia, but we also have a place in North Saanich or on Vancouver Island. And usually what I
Hmm.
do is, today is Friday, I usually go Fridays afternoons. I leave here with a flight, I go to Victoria, and then I spend the weekend in our place in North Saanich, and we have a farm there, and we have 7 horses. My wife, myself, ride English
Oh.
dressage. So it gives me a break away from all the companies that I do
Mhm.
here. And then at one point, I was going mainly I fly to Vancouver and Vancouver to Victoria, which is a 12-minute flight. I call it my overseas flight. And so I was sitting in my overseas flight, and it was full. And I was sitting next to this fella, and he says, I don't know if you remember me. And I said, I kind of do, yeah. And he said, we were sitting together, and you're writing a book. How's your book going? And his name was Dr. Tom Romer. And I said, you're talking about Against All Odds? Yeah. And I said, very good, but I'm working on another book now. And and he said, "Oh, which one?" And I said, "It's ADHD Unlocked." And he was
Mm.
Dr. Tom Romer, who was the vice president academic of the British Columbia Institute of Technology, and he said that's interesting because we are looking at studying and what can we do, and we are approaching something they call micro certification.
Mm.
And then the plane stopped, and he got off, and I got off, and so and then the following Friday, purely coincidental. He was again, the flight was full. He was sitting in 2C, I was sitting in 5A, and I saw him, and I said, Tom, Tom. And all the people said, well, what's going on? I said, wait for me at the gate, I need to talk to you. And so, because then I said to him, I'm in the final stages of my book, ADHD Unlocked, and tell me about micro certification. And and
Mm-hmm.
and I need you. The problem I have is the book. The book is very, very good. It talks about my history, other people's history. The foreword written by a good friend of ours, Dr. Tracy Lotz, who's a medical doctor and a specialist, ADHD, and she wrote the intro. And so it's a very interesting book. But I said to him, there is something is missing in it. Is that,
Mm-hmm.
okay, interesting information, John. Where do we go from here is the question. And
Mm-hmm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
and I said to him, so Tom, when you mention to micro certification, what does it mean? And what are you doing in the BCIT university? And he said, basically the approach is that if to get to a specialty of some sort that will take 3 years, 4 years to learn, probably only 6 months of that, hypothetically speaking, are focusing on the trait set that you're trying to acquire. The rest of it is and indirectly other information that is not necessarily critical to the skill sets that you're trying to acquire, but more to the overall rounding of it. And so that modifications likely could be made to that area that the time sitting in a school, university, whatever that may setting for 4 years is very difficult for people, in particular
Mm-hmm.
ADHD, dyslexia, and other things like that. So micro certification may well be a direction that we can go to develop skill set that we desperately need in North America, I believe, without
Mm-hmm.
making it something that lasts for that time or in some different framework.
Mm-hmm.
And so
No,
that
I
made sense to me.
completely, yeah, I completely agree. I think, one of the really cruel things that we do, again, is we have this like one model. Everyone has to go to a 4-year college. And then if you want to kind of specialize in something, you have to go to school even more. And yeah, for students who struggle with ADHD, that's torture. It's so difficult. Even getting through like your K through 12 education is so torturous. So yeah, I do agree. And I do recommend, I have students who are kind of like coming out of school and wondering like, what do I do? Where do I go? And I think more and more in the future we're going to see, not just because of uh, the need for our education models to shift, but because of the workforce. And we can't just put out 4-year college degree, students, and expect the world to run.
And the other part about it, Bibi, I say, not bragging about me, but I'm a bit of a model, saying
Mhm.
that obviously I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. Even now, people say to me, does it still bother you that you failed grade 7 3 times? I said, it sure does. Still does now.
Mhm.
I should have left earlier. You know, So the point that I'm making, tongue in cheek, to a certain extent, is that the I did well. That when I discovered ADHD, even at 62, a lot of people had said to me, "You should write a book. You have such an interesting life," and blah blah blah. Writing books is not easy, and so
Mhm.
and a lot of times I start over, and then by the time I had all that experience behind me, and then obviously ADHD, I recognized it, and so I started writing a book. It took me 80 years to live it. 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it. And then since that, I did one, ADHD Unlocked, another one, Finding Your Passion, Living the Dream, another one that I did, this is a good one, at 84, Living Young, Dying Old. That's a picture of me, actually. I'm
Wow.
I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America, and so because I believe in fitness as well, and mentally, physically, diet, all those kind of things. But the point that I was making is this one: that I did my own learning in a different
Mhm,
framework. In
mhm.
business, I'm good in business. Obviously, otherwise I wouldn't
Wow.
be running 10 companies. And
Mhm,
so, but my approach to business knowledge and how it should be managed is different from what is taught in school to a certain extent.
mhm,
But I have a habit of doing, rather than following the box, I'm usually sitting outside of the box and say, how about this? Why not that? How about this?
mhm.
How about that? And then obviously I'm a good communicator, and a lot of people in boardrooms kind of are afraid of me in a way because I have these crazy ideas of doing things different. and, and
Mhm.
so, but it has been successful for me. Add to that podcasting, which has become an amazing platform from my perspective in terms of
Mhm.
doing presentations, and it's only on its infancy, and especially
Mhm.
talking about issues that are important to me and to you. Obviously, that reaches a lot of people globally, and the issues that we have relating to neurodiversity issues are all around the world.
Yes.
Everybody is infected by it, and that's why it becomes so important, and that's why I believe to write about it, speak about it, podcast about it is an obligation in a way that I feel I have.
Mhm, mhm. Do you feel, John, that your discipline with diet and exercise had an impact in helping you kind of manage your ADHD?
Not necessarily.
Mm,
The two were at different periods of my life. I
mm,
started to become very conscientious of diet and exercise. I had a case of diverticulitis that nearly killed me. I came that close
wow.
that I had a breach, and so by then I was already 58 years old, and so uh, so it has not adversely affected me. It probably was beneficial in a way,
Mhm.
So but it's now part of who I am.
I see. Interesting. Because I'm assuming that after your diagnosis, you didn't go on any kind of medication for ADHD.
No, they tried to give me. I said I didn't even know there was medication, but the more I found out about it, that I know there's Ritalin and a number of other things, and so I said to my doc at one point, I think it was in 2002, probably 23 years ago. So I said, "Well, should I have medication?" He said, "Yeah, maybe Adderall." I said, "Okay, what does it do?" It helps, blah blah blah, and say, "Okay, why don't you try it?" So he gave me a bottle with 100 Adderall pills in it. I had three of them, and they didn't do nothing for me. And since that time, they're still sitting in my desk drawer, 97 pills. So the answer is no. I don't
Okay.
take any. Yeah, I'm not
Okay.
saying that. I'm not suggesting. I'm certainly not qualified to make comments on that in the sense of what you should or should not do. I don't.
Yeah, and I mean that's sort of in line with ADHD medication. For some people, it really does nothing. For some people, it like helps a little bit, but then
Yeah,
has other side effects that they
yeah,
can't really manage. And then for some people, it's like night and day, like
right,
completely changes things. So
right.
yeah, it really depends on the individual.
So we had a long discussion, but we're not done. We're gonna have to do this again, baby. Oh my God.
That's okay. I've enjoyed this so much. I mean, you have such an incredible story. So, yeah. I'm not surprised we're not done.
Yeah. So I'm going to mention to Scott to stay in touch with you. And then for all those people watching us from around the world, these are the kind of discussions that are important because we speaking about things that Dr. Bibi is very knowledgeable about because that's what she does and has a lot of clients in the fields of ADHD, dyslexia, and other neurodivergent issues. Very, very important to talk about it and subscribe to us if you wish, and then like it, and that encourages us to do more of these podcasts. Have you got a website or so that you can leave with us?
Yes, I do. Do you want me to say it or just
Yeah,
send the link?
yeah.
So I have a website for my work with kids. It's www.oneofonekids.org. I also do a lot of training for therapists, so that's a separate website. It's just my name, drbbbpirayesh.com.
And
So
then
there's two.
have you got books at all, Bibi?
I am as you were showing me your book after book. I'm actually my final deadline for my edits on my book is actually next week.
Okay.
So I'm trying to kind of get all that done in the midst of all these
Yeah, obviously.
power outages that
Have you
we've been
got a
having.
title for the book yet or not yet?
Yes, it's called Difference is Not Deficit.
Okay, I like that. So maybe I get Scott to get that from you, and then we'll put that on there on our website when we release it. This one likely will be released Monday morning, I think. We usually release our podcast. When are we releasing this one? Monday? Okay. So we release it usually fairly quickly. If we do it during the week at an early morning, then we'll release it the same day. This one, because we like to get the most exposure, we do it on the ones that we do on Friday, we do Monday morning.
Okay,
So
wonderful.
we will show your websites on once we do present it, and then obviously you get a copy of it. And then again, it was a pleasure. I feel we're only halfway through what we were going to do, and so we're going to have to do more of it.
Sounds good to me. It was lovely to meet you. Stay warm, even though you're saying it's not cold up there, but stay warm anyway.
Sounds good,
Um,
Bibi.
Thank you. It was lovely to meet you.
And the same for me. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.